Hello again, welcome to Maths is Not a Mystery. We're going to be looking at significant figures in this video. Significant figures is a version of rounding. You've already probably looked at rounding to the nearest 10, the nearest 100, or rounding to decimal places. Significant figures is a combination of all of that. I want to show you what I mean. I used in one of the previous videos about rounding an example of giving the population of a town or a city. So I'm going to try that again. Here's a city and it's got 2,300,568 people. Now, as we said in the previous video, that's not a very useful thing to say about a population because that number can change. In the course of a day, the population of a city will probably change. People are born or they die or they move, and so the number won't be exactly right at the end of it. It's not a very good guide. You can actually give your guide in a far better way. If I was giving a guide of the population of a city, I think probably one significant figure would do. So we're going to write this number to one significant figure, and we usually write that as SF. We sometimes write sig fig. What does it mean? Well, it means that we've got to look at all the numbers that are important, and we start off from the number that's the most important. Now, the number that's the most important here is this 2, because that number 2 is worth more than anything else on that entire line. Okay, 2 is not as big as 8, but remember that this 2 stands for 2 million. That 8 stands for 8. Okay, so we're not going to choose 8 as a significant figure because the population of that city is not 8. Okay, we're not going to choose any of these numbers because none of them are as significant as this big thing here that's 2 million. So what we do is we use our rounding skills. We go to the first important figure if it says one significant figure. We look at the number that comes after it. Is it 5 or more? No, it isn't. Therefore, this stays as it is. So to one significant figure, it's 2, and then everything else is a 0. Everything else that was there were 6 more numbers there, now there are 6 zeros. So the population of that city is roughly 2 million. And there we go. 2,300,000 and so on is roughly 2 million. Remember, we're not having to be exact when we're doing any kind of rounding type work. So if we get another number then, let's try the cost of a nice new car. £22,653.59. Now that number might matter to you if you are spending the money, but if you're going to tell somebody how much your shiny new car cost, they're not really that bothered about the 59p. And really, they're probably not that bothered about much of the detail. So if we were to write this to 2 significant figures, then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting from the very beginning, because these are the most significant figures. That's worth tens of thousands, that's worth thousands, that's worth hundreds, tens, units, and various bits of pence. After the 2 significant figures, look at what comes behind it. Is it bigger than 5? Yes, it is. So that's going to tell us to move that 22 up to 23. So it's going to be 23, and then everything else is a 0. So to 2 significant figures, your new car cost about £23,000. Or you're showing off a bit because you've made the price go up slightly, but it's approximately right. It's closer to 23 than it was to 22,000. Okay, and that's basically what we do with significant figures. We are starting from the most important figure, which is always the one that's worth the most, and then we're keeping the number that it says. 1, 2, 3, 4 important figures. Anything that comes behind it after we've done our little bit of rounding just gets turned into a 0. Let's just do one more just to make absolutely sure. So 7, 3, 2, 1, 8. Let's have that number there, and we're going to write it to 3 significant figures. So again, we're starting from the beginning. We're counting 3 numbers in. We're going to do a bit of rounding. That 1 tells us that we're going to not change the 2 into anything else. So that becomes 73200. Okay, that's been written now to 3 significant figures. This can also happen with decimals. So if we were to write 3.654 to 3 significant figures, again, we don't have to worry that the decimal point is there. We're still counting from the front end of the line, the 3 significant figures. We've got 1, 2, 3. So we're not going to be having any important numbers after the 5. That 4 rounds it back down. It tells us to keep it at a 5. So that becomes 3.65. Now, you can put a 0 there if you want to, but because it's a decimal and because that 0 is not going to change anything, you don't have to put it there. Obviously, in a whole number, you do. Here you've got 73,218. If you just lost that 18, you'd have 732. That's a totally different answer. So you must put the zeros in when it's a whole number so that you don't completely change the meaning of what you've said. But when it's a decimal, all the spare zeros at the end are no longer relevant, so you don't have to bother with them. Now, talking of zeros, we've got an important thing that we need to consider. It's unlikely that you'll see this, but you could, and you certainly could in an exam. You could have something that looks like this. They could ask you to write this number to 1 significant figure. It could be a reading off some sort of gauge, some computerized gauge that's set up to use 5 numbers. Now, in this situation, these things are called leading zeros because they lead ahead of the rest of the number. And leading zeros are worthless. We don't count them as significant figures. We've got 5 units. We've got 8 tens worth 80. We've got 7 hundreds worth 700. We've got no thousands and we've got no 10,000s. So what we're not going to do is always say you start from the left-hand side of your number and you write that one down, because if you did that here, you'll be writing 0. And 785 is not 0. The first significant figure in this number is the 7. Leading zeros need to be ignored. So the first significant figure is 7. The 8 tells us to nudge that one up by 1. So that would become 8, 0, 0. Whether you write those leading zeros back in again is entirely up to you. I wouldn't bother. 785 to 1 significant figure is close to 800. That makes sense, doesn't it? Ignore those totally. That's not the same if this happens. If you were asked here to write this to 3 significant figures, they're not leading zeros. They're part of the number now. They're only leading zeros if they come before any other number at all, like they did up here. This has already started with its number. This is in the hundreds of thousands columns. That's 300,000. So now we count them. 3 significant figures, 1, 2, 3. That 0 there tells us that we don't have to move this one up. So that becomes 300,000. Everything else goes to a 0. So it's just the issue with the zeros that can complicate things very slightly. If they are leading zeros, which means they have nothing in front of them whatsoever in terms of other numbers, ignore them. Don't count them as a significant figure. But if you've got a string of zeros or any other 0 inside the number, then they are important and you do count them as significant figures. That's it, really. That's all you have to do with significant figures. Read how many they're asking you for, find out where to put your little line, do a basic rounding skill to see whether you stay the same or whether you go up to the next number. And remember, if you're going to be removing numbers from a whole number, replace them with zeros. If you're going to be removing them from a decimal, you don't have to replace them with zeros. I hope that's been helpful for you. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.